All right, Kristine.
Oh, yes. Good afternoon, everybody. I agree with Patsy. What a great list of participants. I'm Kristine Kelly, and I am the Atlas Literacy Coordinator. And I am just really thrilled to have Marn back so quickly after retirement. I will be doing some slides today, doing a little bit of talking, but Marn is here to share all her great knowledge with you from a long way away. And so I would like to welcome Marn and welcome to the first of this EBRI webinar series.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Yes, I'm out of retirement to do this webinar, but delighted to do so. If we haven't met, I retired after 13 years of being the Literacy and STAR Coordinator for Atlas. And over those 13 years, I expanded my own knowledge of EBRI. Each year, I learned more and more. I also had the honor of training hundreds of teachers in EBRI. And I also had the privilege of observing them. So after a training year, I was invited, some might say uninvited, but it worked out fine, to observe teachers putting EBRI in action. And I saw so many wonderful things in each and every classroom. What I didn't do over those 13 years is implement EBRI myself. But I come to this webinar with some experience in doing EBRI. I've been tutoring 2 struggling elementary readers since September, implementing many of the EBRI practices and seeing with my own eyes that they work. So I can speak from experience now with actually using these practices. Overall, what I see in my 2 students is a gain in reading skills, and perhaps more importantly, confidence. This is an overview of the series. So after today, we move into diagnostic reading assessment, and my co-presenter will be Krista Coronado from Minneapolis Adult Education, who does many assessments, both in person and remotely. And then for webinars 3 to 6, we move into how to teach the 4 components. So my partner for alphabetics will be Teresa Fisher from West ABE. Kristine will come back for vocabulary. Rob Podlasek will join me for fluency, and then Penny Brown for comprehension. All of the webinars are on Fridays from 1 to 2:30. For each, you can earn 1.5 CEUs for a possible total of 9. The evaluations will be sent after today, and then the CEUs following completion of the evaluations. I encourage you to attend as many of the webinars as you can, because that will give you the full picture of EBRI. Today is the foundation. It's not the teaching, but after today is when we move into the testing and teaching. A special feature of this series is a participant folder, and the link is on the screen. Gail will also send that out with the evaluation. If you have the link, you can access all of the documents. What I plan to do is upload documents before each meeting, so it's not overwhelming. For example, what you'll find in this link today is a more detailed syllabus of what the webinar series looks like, access to this resource, EBRI in Minnesota, from 2015, last update. If we were meeting in person, I would hand you a copy of this. What you can do is print any pages that you want. You don't have to print the whole thing. It follows the series format. but I always like myself to have something in print. Other documents are short 2-page summaries of new evidence from 2019 and 2020. This came from Project STAR, and basically there's no new evidence, but rather supporting evidence from the past. There's an explanation talking points that will help you introduce the 4 components, a list of the reading foundational skills, and then a reading component interrelationship activity. Hopefully we'll have time to do some of that activity, but if not, then you can access it later. For today, we'll focus on where does EBRI come from? What do STAR and EBRI look like? How are they similar? How are they different? What are the 4 reading components? And what are their very interesting 6 interrelationships? Any questions, Kristine, in the chat?
No questions so far.
There are 3 sources of evidence that form the foundation of evidence-based reading instruction. The first are scientific reading research studies, and we get those from researchers. So typically these researchers have advanced degrees and are affiliated with a university or college. And note that we're talking about more than one for each source. Researchers collect data according to experimental processes and analyze with statistical methods. So this source is very formal. Once they've completed the research, then they look for findings and conclusions, which are further scrutinized by other researchers. And what they're looking for is what worked. What does the data say what worked? Then they produce research reports, which are not always easy to read, and they are further peer reviewed and peer approved before they are made public. If you want to access any of these research reports, Links Literacy Information Network System and Information Network System has many of them that are free to take a look at. A second source is professional wisdom. And we get professional wisdom from experts, typically also with higher degrees and often affiliated with colleges or universities, who go bigger, meaning they look at research from multiple fields. For example, K through 12 reading and language studies, of which there's much, much more than in adult basic education. Adolescent reading, which is often closer to our population of adults. ESOL and LD. In fact, the LD studies have been very beneficial in terms of teaching alphabetics and perhaps fluency too. These experts work together to reach consensus on what's promising for particular populations of adult readers. And this is important, their consensus and their conclusions, because they fill in the gaps of limited adult literacy research. And the question they're answering is what will look. A third source of evidence, which is very important in Minnesota ABE, is practitioner wisdom. And that's you, teachers. What do you know? What do you learn? What do you bring to the table of evidence-based research? What you can bring is your own assessment of students' reading strengths and needs. So by using short tests, you establish or you collect your own evidence for what your students need across the 4 reading components. More naturally, I think as you teach, you observe and note students' engagement and progress with the practices and resources you've chosen. So what you answer is what did work and maybe sometimes what did not work. And then I think Atlas through professional development gives teachers many opportunities to collect and share their challenges and successes, the teaching materials they prefer, the curricular websites and platforms that they use. Kristine, did you want to add anything to those 3 resources?
No, except the power of the practitioner wisdom, and something that I've always appreciated from Marn is her attention that she pays to the practitioner wisdom by she always consistently collected data from programs and teachers for what they were doing, her observations, just really talking to a lot of people to get that, just the value on the practitioner wisdom. I think sometimes we might feel that that practitioner wisdom kind of falls aside to the research and the people looking at the bigger picture. But in fact, it is such an important part of the whole formula.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Those doing the work definitely need to be listened to. If you want to access the practitioner wisdom from Minnesota, you can go to the Atlas Reading Resource Library, and the link is at the top. Some samples of what you'll find is something more formal that Kim Johnson and I completed in 2012, where we looked at data from STAR teachers, and we found that STAR was beneficial not only to reading skills, but to persistence and attendance. There are many, many documents on challenges, solutions, and successes. They are by categories such as diagnostic reading assessment and all 4 reading components. There are lists of effective resources, teacher tried and true, materials, strategies, websites, practices, and platforms. In fact, something that I'll upload for meeting 3 is a chart that we created last year during a webinar series that lists the participants' favorite materials for each reading component. A decision that was made with practitioner wisdom maybe 5, 6 years ago, based on data that I collected from my observations, was to recommend that teachers assume or assess vocabulary. What that means is because so many classes that I observed had students with vocabulary needs and or they were receiving vocabulary instruction, it just made sense, since so many of our learners are ESL students, to assume vocabulary needs and teach it to everyone. And during those observations, the engagement of students in vocabulary further supported this practitioner wisdom decision. Okay, I want you to think about those 3 sources of evidence, and in the chat, put the ones that are most important for your work. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be all. And you can simply type in what's underlined: research, experts, teachers, or all. Well, I'm seeing that most of you find all to be important, and I would totally agree with that. And I especially like what Manfred wrote, teachers, experts, research, in that order. What I'm going to talk about next are the key practices for teachers. They're general, and they can be established in any classroom. The first is to assess students to determine their reading strengths and needs. And again, this means conducting short tests beyond TABE or CASAS. TABE and CASAS are good starting points, but their intended purpose is to measure the end product of the reading process, comprehension. They are not set up to assess alphabetics, fluency, or vocabulary. Although I think, Kristine, maybe you can clarify this, the new tests do include some of the components.
As far as the new tests, including some of the components of reading?
Yeah, like, isn't there an alphabetics part in one of those standardized tests?
I know that at some of the lower levels, they're on the reading test, and some of the lower levels, it may start out with some questions that are very low and may involve alphabetics. But in general, these tests, I mean, even those of you who've seen like the lower level of the TABE, they pick up pretty quickly with full sentences and short paragraphs, and you know, moving into, you know, academic vocabulary. So, and yeah, and in the case of the TABE 11-12, the length of the passages are longer, and so I think fluency plays a greater role in the TABE.
Okay, but still not enough to identify strengths and needs.
No, not by any means. You know, they are silent. The reading tests are silent reading comprehension tests. That's what they remain.
Okay. And the scale score is still about comprehension, or all about comprehension.
Yes.
Okay. So what you get from those short informal tests allows you to form large or small groups and plan lessons that meet students' needs. And you can also do this one-on-one. So it doesn't have to be a group. In small programs, it works very effectively one-to-one. Your large groups tend to be for vocabulary and comprehension, although if students have levels across, like 4 to 5, 6 to 8, then it would be small groups. Alphabetics tends to be small groups. Fluency needs to be small groups, but it may include all of the students in your class. The third practice is to provide explicit instruction, which may not be new. We've been talking about explicit instruction for years. The explanation piece is explaining the why you are teaching this and what you're going to do. Modeling is the I do step, where you model what sounding out words or fluent reading or the meaning of vocabulary words is. Then you move into guided practice, we do, where students join you, and then application, where they are ready to work on their own. The guided practice is not a quick step. It can take quite a while to get students to that independent application step. And then the monitoring, again, is what you do naturally along the way. Another important key practice is selecting evidence-based instructional techniques, strategies, and materials, things that are proven to work with your population of students. And that what might take a while, but is also very important, is to organize a reading routine, monitor progress, and adjust that routine as needed. Next, we're going to spend some time looking at what different versions of those key practices look like. The STAR Bright version is ideal and wasn't always doable from the beginning of STAR in 2009, and really became a challenge when the pandemic hit. But ideally, this is what evidence-based reading instruction can look like. Teachers do a lot of assessment. They assess 3 to 4 of the reading components that may or may not include vocabulary. And with STAR, the target population is low, high, intermediate ABE or advanced ESL. Volunteers and support staff over the years have also been crucial for this first step. And I've trained many volunteers and support staff in the processes. Then teachers use those results to group, plan, and deliver instruction in all the reading components of need or priority. So within a STAR class, you have a schedule that may include alphabetics and vocabulary on Tuesday, Thursday, fluency and comprehension on Monday, Wednesday, or other combinations like that. Steps 3, 4, or practices 3, 4, and 5 are similar to that previous slide, where teachers are using explicit instruction. They're selecting evidence-based techniques, strategies, and materials, and they organize routines and adjust to accommodate the entry of new students. So again, this is ideal, and many teachers accomplished it over the years and saw very inspiring success. The STAR or the EBRI Light version is what we call real, meaning if you can't do it ideally, then do the best you can, which reflects what's real in your situation. You may only have the resources to conduct 1 to 2 diagnostic reading assessments, and EBRI also broadens the practices from beginning through advanced ABE and ESL readers. So EBRI is actually specific to Minnesota. Other states might call STAR and EBRI the same, or not call it STAR and just call it EBRI. But ours is broader to take into account all of the different settings that are in Minnesota ABE. Teachers still use those results to group, plan, and deliver instruction, but maybe not with all 4 reading components, but the primary components of need. Explicit instruction is still in place. In fact, I see so many I saw so many wonderful examples of those 4 explicit instruction steps. Explanation is not always needed, but I saw so much modeling, guided practice, and application. Because the population is broader, then the recommended techniques, strategies, and materials tend to be a larger collection. Routines are always important for reading, but with EBRI, not only are you accommodating new students, but the program capacity. Pandemic might is what teachers did to the best of their ability during the pandemic. What I observed in the classes that I visited, so I was again invited to attend remote classes, is that ESL readers joined more frequently. There was maybe a constant new student entry, but typically what I observed ended up to be smaller groups. If possible, and it wasn't always possible or even realistic, 1 to 2 diagnostic assessments were conducted. And what was made available to teachers were screen shareable slide sets. So I created many sets that I'll share with you during webinar 2. So you don't have to create anything to assess remotely, but rather they're available on the Atlas website. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, I still saw excellent explicit instruction. Those 4 steps were in place, not always explanation again, depending on when I visited the classroom. And in addition to print materials, teachers were selecting platforms and websites. And I did see routines. Again, despite all of those challenges, I saw routines that made students more comfortable in that remote setting. And again, changes were made according to student attendance and program capacity. Kristine is going to explain what she knows about STAR EBRI now as we continue with the pandemic. So Kristine, I'll give it over to you.
And you'll click for me. Thank you. I taught STAR all last year. I've been on leave in the classroom, but last year I was teaching and was virtual, and never in my instruction were routines more important than when I was teaching virtually. And I also found that I had to slow way down. For vocabulary instruction, I used to do 10 words a week, then went down to 5, and then students with student input went down to 3 a week. But I was even covering 3 words over 2 weeks, 2 classes a week, because of slowing down and really using those steps of explicit instruction. I also saw better results. So one of the things that I would take with me from teaching STAR and teaching in general online is to slow down, even in person, and slowing down seemed to provide better results with my students. But yes, I've been having conversations and digging around a little bit to see, as people are still teaching virtually and also in person, and some great examples I found recently. This is, I believe, Penny Brown, in-person classes, and really focused on all 4 components, plus writing. And I know there's also a GED class where the 4 components are part of that, and then also integrating some science. And I think that a comment that was made in the chat box about students being good test takers, but still having needs in fluency, for example, that is true. And our GED level students, though they may be testing between a 9th and a 12th grade on a silent reading comprehension test like the TABE or CASAS, they may, and they very likely need academic vocabulary, word study, and some work with fluency. Next bullet. In-person and Zoom classes focused on alphabetics and fluency, and also pulling STAR and that alphabetics and fluency work into family literacy classes. So you can contextualize STAR, and you can teach the components in if you can't do a standalone class, you can definitely make these strategies part of something else, like this family literacy class. And I've noticed that some programs are keeping one or two online classes due to student request along with in-person, because there are some students who are still benefiting and are able to fit online classes in more flexibly. Next bullet. Rosemont Egan Apple Valley ABE. I was there a few weeks ago during a workshop, and one of the teachers has been really hitting phonemic awareness with ELs and utilizing these sound pattern charts where the students are working on distinguishing different letter sounds in words. Those might be vowel sounds, and so very explicit work with phonemic awareness in that way. Next bullet. Minneapolis is working with e-diagnostics, and of course we can do the diagnostic reading assessment. Marn created e-diagnostics where we can administer word reading test for alphabetics, the fluency test and comprehension using slides, and doing so remotely. I did assess some students remotely last year. It took a little more time, but I was able to successfully do so. And Minneapolis also has a STAR coordinator, which not every program can have, but I know that's made a big difference. And they're continuing with fluency and comprehension groups with volunteers, and those are online. A couple things. One teacher sent me this great vocabulary chart. This is a combination of the knowledge rating chart along with a quadrant chart where students can begin to work with the word, define it, the class comes up with an example, etc. I like these. I like when the knowledge, the word knowledge or the knowledge rating charts incorporate words from a text that students are working on. So in this case, here are five target words around this topic of good health habits. And key to using these knowledge rating charts is, have students rate themselves before, and then after working with the words, make sure to have them go back because they can see progress. And a goal is we really want them to be landing into the third and fourth columns with knowing at least one definition or way to use a word, or of course, knowing multiple ways to use a word. Also in the corner here, Padlet. I talked to a teacher from Metro North, and I am hopefully going to see it. She's just starting it out, using Padlet for a word wall where students can actually post comments and create sentences using the words that are posted, and they can comment on each other's sentences, and it's in more of a social media format. And finally, I thought this was a wonderful comment recently from the Language and Literacy Institute in the coffee break for EBRI. And I think, again, this is that practitioner wisdom. This is the data that practitioners are collecting. And I will leave you to read this. But this idea that this teacher is seeing that there is a noticeable improvement in how students are doing in the level above the level that they were learning tier 2 words when they're actually moving into a higher ELL class. So, I think Marn has heard a lot of these anecdotal comments. I have as well. These are very powerful. And this is the kind of data that we collect in our classrooms that help us to really see the benefit of this working with these components.
So this first webinar tends to be kind of an information dump. That's how it's been always. Are there any questions, comments, experiences that you want to share? You can put those in the chat box or unmute yourself and just speak out. I have a question for Kristine. I'm wondering if EBRI is new to any of our participants, if we could resurrect that list of teachers who were willing to have other teachers visit their classrooms remotely.
To resurrect that list or even find some additional people.
Yes.
Now, what Marn's talking about is when she did the STAR cohort, started with a new hybrid model and then a pandemic. And so she had to get creative, and there was an option for teachers to observe other teachers. And there were a group of teachers who made themselves available and gave their class times, day and evening options. And teachers came into our classrooms and they observed. And I think it was a great experience for those of us who were observed, and certainly for those who were observing. I know that Marn got some rich reflections, and I think that's an excellent idea, and I would be happy to do that. So I will put that on my list. And also, I think that there's a question here from Keith Lewis in the chat. And Keith, I believe that example of the, was that your example of the phonemic awareness?
Yes, I believe so. Yep, that sound chart.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Thank you for sharing that in an email.
You're welcome. Yeah.
You have a question.
Yeah, I've been doing it. Yeah, my question was, I'm familiar with both the term STAR and EBRI, and I'm just wondering how do they interrelate to each other, or how do they relate to each other?
That's a very good question. The foundation of STAR is EBRI or EBRI or EBRI, however you want to say it. So how we understand it in Minnesota is that EBRI is bigger than STAR because it applies to a broader population of students. STAR is specific to low, high, intermediate, and advanced ESL. Whereas in Minnesota, we have expanded many of those STAR strategies and practices and processes to a broader population. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So STAR is mainly focused on intermediate to advanced ELs.
Yes. ABE and ELLs. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's evidence-based reading is across the continuum. We certainly assess learners lower than the STAR target and plan instruction accordingly. And also for students above, LINKS, which is our, I don't know, kind of our central community research information gathering center for adult basic ed nationally, recently revamped their 2 courses in evidence-based reading instruction. And the one is for beginning to intermediate level readers. And they also have one that's geared for teachers of advanced readers, because advanced readers still have needs. Those needs may be in comprehension and vocabulary, but we still can assess them and we still can plan instruction accordingly, which is the evidence-based research. STAR captures a population within that typically, in my experience, those intermediate levels take a long time to make level gains. And so it's a really good population to apply this research to.
And to add more to Keith's answer, we didn't want to leave anybody out in Minnesota. So we found that not all programs or sites could do STAR, could do that ideal implementation, but we didn't want to leave out any students or programs or teachers. So that's another reason why we expanded STAR into EBRI. So we see it as a broader set of practices, not just the foundation of STAR.
Martin?
Manfred, did you
Yeah.
want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add too that as a disciple of Marn Frank, and everything she has taught over the last 8 to 10 years. I think 8 or 10 years ago was the first time I attended one of your classes, and I've found them every time I've worked with you informative. But what I have learned, though, and that is the flip side of not just the student, but now working in the classroom as students come in, and after having done this for a number of years, I really get a good feel for where students are at before I even do the assessment. And it just kind of, after a while, kind of get a real good sense. And what that does, it helps to filter out. We have 22 students online every day, and that's a lot of students to use. So we have to kind of prioritize, even before we start the assessment, who do we work with?
Yeah.
And the experience of having done STAR for all these years has really helped to kind of develop a filter. This is the first group of students we need to work on. These we can take as the next staging and so on. So I think there's also a benefit of doing this for the instructors, not just the students.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's take a 5-minute break. Stretch break, coffee break, whatever you need. And then when we come back, we will move into the 4 reading components and their interrelationships. Welcome back. The next section will focus on the 4 reading components and their interrelationships. And this, I hope, will further build your foundation of understanding EBRI. The chart shows the 4 reading components, and they make up what can often be a very complicated process of reading. Alphabetics is about reading words. Vocabulary is about recognizing words. Fluency is about reading text, and comprehension is about understanding text. You can pair these 4 reading components in several ways. So if you look across, the word skills obviously include alphabetics and vocabulary because they're focused on word instruction. The text skills include fluency and comprehension because they are focused on reading text. And it can be short text, it can be as short as a phrase, all the way through longer articles. Another way to pair them is by print and meaning. The 2 print skills are alphabetics and fluency because they're focused on getting print off the page. Vocabulary and comprehension are the meaning skills because they're focused on either understanding the meaning of a word or the intended meaning of the text. This is why it's so important to assess at least one of these components, because you're not told the skill level through just CASAS and TABE. And if you don't address the needs, there's not going to be much success in moving forward with that end product comprehension. So the process is considered to be alphabetics, fluency, and vocabulary, leading to the end product of comprehension. Let's take a closer look at alphabetics and fluency, the print skills. Alphabetics involves knowing and using basic print concepts. The first concepts are actually things like top to bottom, left to right, and page to page. Those very, very basic concepts of what and how print looks like in English. The next skill is phonological awareness, which is understanding the sounds of English, how they're made, how we can join them or blend them, how we can separate them or segment them, how we can add or delete sounds to form new words. It's an oral skill, which along with those basic print skills, prepare students to step into the written aspect of print, which includes knowing the Roman alphabet letter names and all of the sound patterns that they create. We all know there are only 26 alphabet letter names. There are 44 to 45 sounds in English, depending on how you categorize what, but there are over 120 spellings. And that's what's the difficult piece of English, are all the different spellings for same sounds. It's also important to include spelling with reading because of that fact. It's also a process that support each other, or 2 processes that support each other. So going back and forth between reading and spelling helps to build those alphabetic skills. So that set of skills is for beginning level readers, focused on reading 1-syllable words. The next set are for decoding multi-syllable words. And that includes teaching syllable, prefix, root, and suffix patterns. They are absolutely necessary to chunk those multisyllable words into decodable parts and then recognize their meaning, connect it to spoken language. Fluency can also be level. So at beginning levels, it can involve reading letter names accurately and quickly, reading sounds accurately and quickly, moving to phrases and short text that can include just sentences or short paragraphs. The next step of fluency, moving into longer texts, requires reading the words accurately, between 90 and 95% correct, at an efficient speed that is not too fast and not too slow, and can actually vary from student to student. So for fluency, we don't talk about a word's correct per minute, but rather an efficient or appropriate speed. What's very important about fluency is learning how to read text in meaningful phrases, not word by word, but in phrases that our brains can hang on to. And then finally, expression. Reading with changes in the voice that support meaning. Expression is often the last fluency skill to develop and is quite challenging for struggling readers. But with enough modeling, they can add that to their reading. They can imitate how you as a proficient reader read and model or add that to their own reading. The meaning skills involve vocabulary and comprehension. For vocabulary, we're talking about knowing a variety of words across 3 tiers. Tier 1 includes basic concrete words that are used in everyday language, and that would be most appropriate for beginning level readers. Tier 2 words include academic abstract words that appear frequently in written language at 4th grade and above. So tier 1 is possibly focused on grade equivalent 1 to 3, and tier 2 from 4th grade and above. There's also tier 3 subject specific words, which might cross all levels. And those would be words that are important or essential to learn for subjects such as math or science or social studies. Comprehension is across levels, and examples of comprehension include reading text closely, determining key details, inferences, main ideas, themes, describing connections or relationships between persons, events, steps, ideas, or concepts. Kristine, did you want to add anything about those brief definitions of the 4 reading components?
No, I think they're very thorough.
We'll dig deeper into all 4 in meetings 3 through 6. But again, this adds to your foundation of EBRI. Kristine will talk about CCRS and the alignment between EBRI and CCRS.
Because I'm always the one who says, what about the CCRS alignment? The work that we do when we teach STAR or evidence-based reading is aligned with the CCRS, and the skills of alphabetics and fluency fall into the reading foundational skills, which are in the Blue Book. They are not considered part of the actual course standards, but are there because we acknowledge that students need to have some skills in order to do other things. So one of the great contributions that Marn made for us here in Minnesota is when you look in your blue book, you will note that in the reading foundational skills, you will only see reading foundations 2, 3, and 4. 1 is not there. And there was a decision made for Minnesota that we would put 1 back in there. That is originally from the Common Core state standards. And why it was missing from this, the translation for adults is a mystery, but we do know that for many of our learners, the basic features of print, even the concept of print, reading left to right, these are very, very new skills. And we need to acknowledge that as reading foundational work with our students. So beyond that, Reading Foundations 2 deals with the understanding of spoken word syllables and sounds, so the phonemes. 3 is applying those grade level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. And finally, 4 is targeting fluency so that our students are reading with accuracy and rate and prosody at a level that supports comprehension. Next. And one of the things that that we talked about early on with the CCRS and EBRI and STAR is students are working on their concepts of print, their alphabetics, and their fluency skills, but they also need to be making meaning at the same time. It's not a question anymore of learning to read before reading to learn, that we do, even though we often do it less formally, where we do want students to be making some meaning. We may not be explicitly teaching comprehension strategies, but we are checking in with our students to see what their understanding is. And we do look at the standards here, in particular, the Anchor 4, which deals with vocabulary specifically, Anchor 1, which deals with understanding what a text says explicitly and making inferences. Anchor 2, which is the summarizing, or I call it the summarizing standard, but it's about being able to determine a main idea or a central theme. Anchor 3 is how pieces, parts of a text, components interact. And Anchor 5 is about text structure. So especially starting to get into these intermediate levels where students are they need to be able to recognize chronological order, compare and contrast order, problem solution, those types of things. So we do that work with text as well. So there is a lot. STAR or EBRI doesn't cover all of the CCRS ELA standards that students need, but it definitely covers a core. And so there is very meaningful overlap between the two.
So I think what I'm trying to explain, or we're trying to explain in these slides, is that implementing EBRI does meet the expectations of CCRS, not in whole, but certainly in part.
Yes, it is not a separate, we don't have to look at it as a separate piece, but if you are doing the diagnostic reading assessment and then working with a lot of the strategies, teaching techniques that Marn will be talking about in this webinar series, you are definitely targeting some of the CCRS standards.
Mm-hmm. When we first began with STAR back in 2009, I think we believed STAR was equal to EBRI. They were interchangeable. But then we moved into agreeing that EBRI was greater than STAR. And then along came CCRS, and CCRS is greater than both STAR and EBRI. Any questions, comments, experiences about those 4 reading components? Okay. This is a diagram of the interrelationships, and I actually shared this with the parents of both of my students because I wanted them to understand what I intended to do and what I intended to cover during our tutoring sessions. So I think this does a wonderful job of showing that reading is the product. And then it involves those 4 reading components, and they themselves are related to each other. They are separate, but they are also related. And there's overlap between them. Here is an example, 3 examples actually, of the interrelationships between these 4 reading components. The first is between alphabetics and fluency. Readers must read words accurately and automatically, that's the alphabetics piece, in order to read text fluency. So think about a struggling beginning reader who doesn't have solid phonics skills, who is struggling to read the words in a sentence. They spend so much energy on decoding that fluency is lost. It cannot be smooth, it cannot be even, it cannot be phrased if they're so focused on the word level. The second one is that between alphabetics and vocabulary, where readers must know word parts, whether we're talking about sounds, syllables, prefixes, suffixes, to decode words accurately enough to recognize the meaning, to connect that word to what they've heard in their life. If they can't do that quickly and accurately, then they're losing word meaning. The third one is between fluency and comprehension. Readers must read text accurately at an efficient rate and in phrases to understand meaning. And that's just the reality of how our brains work. We cannot process too much information and remember it. It has to be in meaningful chunks in order for successful comprehension to occur. Set 2 involves vocabulary to alphabetics. And this one is a little tricky, but it goes back to the value of knowing words. Readers must have familiarity with words, vocabulary knowledge to decode, recognize, or self-correct. So if they're reading words they don't know, they may not know where to start. And they may skip or guess and interfere with their understanding. They may be reluctant to decode because they don't know the word at all. It's just a string of letters. The fifth one is that if readers don't know word meanings, again, emphasizing the value of vocabulary, they soon lose text meaning. In fact, one of the strongest interrelationships is that between vocabulary and comprehension. And finally, if readers struggle to understand meaning, they have difficulty learning new words from text. And this has been called a reader's paradox, where struggling readers don't like to read and they avoid reading. Unfortunately, if they're only involved in oral language and not written language, they're not exposed to lots and lots of words, because basic communication is often at a tier 1 level. So if they don't engage with written text, they're not exposed to all those words that appear in higher level text. Questions? Keith, Manfred, do you have questions? No?
I don't. There was a lot there, though.
Yes, I know, and we'll practice. It can get tricky and complicated, but I think if you apply it to your students, these interrelationships will make much more sense. I want you to think about this interrelationship, which you may have observed in your classroom, where a reader is hurrying through text at too fast a pace, making lots of mistakes, ignoring punctuation marks, and not reading with any chunking or phrasing. He complains, "I don't understand what I read." Which interrelationship is this? And just think about it, and then I'll tell you the answer.
Marn, if I
Yes.
may, in this regard, one of the things I found is depending on the native language of the students, sometimes speed is a factor. And that I have some native language speakers where their own language is very rapid and does not have the pauses and the structures that we have in American English. And so they read quickly. And I already have my own little gimmick where I just do a fake siren. You're going too fast. And the students laugh and realize, and get them to slow down and try it again. And, you know, as you have taught me, is that there is significant improvement when students actually think and slow down what it is that they're doing. But I found that speed is not necessarily across all our students, that native language and background, cultural background, is a bearing on how fast they read and their ability then to be able to comprehend and understand.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. And I think what you're talking about, Manfred, is prosody, which can vary or does vary from language to language. So learning the prosody of English is very important to the reading process.
Agree.
I think what Manfred has hinted at is that the correct answer is fluency to comprehension. Try this one, where you have a reader who's avoiding reading, dislikes reading, and complains that there's too many hard words. If you're thinking vocabulary to comprehension, you're correct. If you're thinking comprehension to vocabulary, you're also correct. So this is that paradox and that interrelationship, that very strong interrelationship between vocabulary and comprehension. This is the third one. And if you're thinking vocabulary to alphabetics, you're correct. And this is the final one. And I think I gave you a hint on this earlier. So if you're thinking alphabetics to fluency, you're correct. In that document that's available in the shared drive, there's a similar activity, and it gives you 6 examples rather than 4 if you want to work with those a little bit more. We're going to move into a breakout group activity. And here are your directions. If necessary, select a leader to guide introductions and discussions. And take turn answering one or all of these questions. What EBRI practices are doable in your class? What are your students' primary reading component needs? And what interrelationships do you observe? And you'll have about 10 minutes. We'll need 5 minutes at the end to wrap up. So you'll have about 10 minutes to talk in your breakout groups.
Okay, Marn, I'll go ahead and open the rooms, and just to let everyone know that after 8 minutes, you'll get a countdown. So go ahead and stay in your room and you'll come back automatically when the actual 10 minutes are up. Okay, and I will open the rooms now.
Well, I hope that short breakout group increased your practitioner wisdom. Going back to what I asked Kristine about making remote observations available, she and I will work on that so that if you're interested in entering another teacher's classroom to see EBRI in action, we'll get permission from those teachers for you to do so. Looking ahead at our next meeting, it's all about diagnostic reading assessment. We will look at tests for assessing word reading, phonics, fluency, and assessment. And all the tools that I will share with you are available for free online. In addition to that, we'll revisit the value of diagnostic reading assessment. I'll share the evidence specific to DRA. And then, of course, we'll go through not only the processes, but the purposes. And having a solid understanding of those 4 reading components will help you understand why we test, how we test, and then what do we do with those results. So that additional interrelationship between testing and teaching is where we move forward from now on. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your interest in EBRI. Between now and the end of the series, if you have any questions, you can email me at my personal account, mmfrank54@gmail.com. What Kristine and I plan to do is I will CC her in any replies. And then if she has more information to add, she'll be able to do so.
Thank you so much, Marn, for coming back to do this so that we can all benefit again, because I learned something new every time I listen to you talk about EBRI. And yes, I see people already saying looking forward to the next session. And did we let people know they'll be receiving, you will receive an evaluation? And upon completing
that at the beginning, yeah.
Oh, good. Just as a reminder, you will receive, after completing that evaluation, which we very much value, you will receive a CEU, and we have tweaked the language on the CEU to be particularly helpful if using it for relicensure as a reading relicensure CEU. So thank you, everyone.
So we use the language of reading preparation, which should be more convincing for your committee, your continuing education committee, to approve. And really, I welcome your questions. I still feel like I have a lot to contribute. Again, thanks for your interest, and I hope to see you or hear you in the next webinars.